Our next session combines two speakers that you would all be familiar with. Actually, I'm not quite sure. Who would like to go first? Okay, sure. All right, you've already heard his voice, so just wait, Jim. You can't hold him back. But so you'll all be familiar with Senator Jim Molan. I'll just say a few things. He's come up behind me and said I'm the ultimate ex. So it's brought back some bad memories of ex-girlfriends or what have you. But he's an ex-senator. He's an ex-major general. We all know that he was head of Operation Sovereign Borders. He's highly decorated, probably the most decorated person to have been in Parliament in many respects. We know he oversaw the Australian operations of the Iraq War. There's been very few people in our Parliament with the breadth of his experience and the extraordinary achievements that he has had. So I know we all look forward to hearing from Jim Molan. No. So it's a double act. So our other guest, and he told me, look, this is exactly the kinds of people that we want. He started off as a coal miner. He was right there on the front line. Then he was able to then graduate to a mining engineer. Now, I didn't know about this. I didn't know this about him, but the way Pauline Hanson discovered him was he was an activist as a climate skeptic. So he was going around speaking, talking about what he saw as the dangers of apocalyptic climate predictions. And it was there that Pauline Hanson noticed him and tapped him on the shoulder for where he is today, back from the brink, having had a fall through our constitution, and he's back again. So please welcome Senator Malcolm Roberts.
Thank you.
So Jim, why don't you start? Aim to speak between 10 and 12 minutes.
Thank you very, very much, Tanvir. Thank you. What a great introduction. And I really wanted to speak about my favourite subject today, which is me. But they've convinced me to talk about something else. And I'm very honoured to be here with Malcolm and because Malcolm is where I would like to be. And where I will certainly try to be going into the future. But
you don't like being tall?
That's right. No, that's unfair. But what I want to talk about today for a couple of minutes, generated by the clock, is the next 100 years. And we've been listening to people for the last couple of days here, speaking to us about what we need to be doing now and how we need to be doing it. To get to the next 100 years, we've got to get past the next 10 years. And that's going to be the real challenge. We look back on our history, and we have an incredible history because that history has produced what undeniably is the best, freest country in the world, and that's what we've got to defend. We will defend it, which is why we're here now, and we will bring ideas together and we will go into the future. Now, I kind of talk about things that are challenging for us in the sense of energy, in the sense of water, in the sense of population, and we've heard a bit about all of those things. I certainly talk about challenges we face, and we've heard great dissertations over the last couple of days about the need for us to fight for our freedom and for our rights. And those four things together are what I think takes up most of our time. But I reckon there's a fifth thing we've got to worry about. And that fifth thing that we've got to worry about is what I call high-level national security. If we look at what I've called low level, and it's unfair because it's extraordinarily complex, but lower level national security, I think we're doing very, very well. If you look at our border policy, as I said in my first speech, we now control the borders. All we've got to do now is stop people coming in legally. We now control the borders. We are doing well on counter-terrorism. As Minister Dutton quite often says, we have stopped a large number of these, but one may get through and hurt us in the future, but we are doing very well. And our intelligence agencies are world standard and plugged into the best in the world. We're doing very well on foreign fighters. We're doing well on all of these kind of issues that I would call low-level security. Now, they're critical to us because if someone blows a bomb blows up a bomb in this room, we're going to get hurt. What I want to talk to you about today is not those things, because we've spoken about them, but for a couple of minutes, just about high-level national security. And when we talk about high-level national security, so often we think of the four nations and an ideology that the Americans talk about. And those four nations are Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. And the ideology, obviously, is Islamic extremism. And again, with our Islamic brothers, with our Muslim brothers beside us, we're doing okay in a kind of a vague and general sense with Islamic extremism. And we'll need to be doing okay for hundreds of years to come. In relation to the other four, of course, we always think of China first. We think of North Korea, and the Americans are handling North Korea well enough at the moment. And let's see what happens going into the future. Things are happening with Iran, and we Australians don't know much about the extraordinary things that are happening in relation to Russia in the Baltic and other places over there, because that's a long way away from us. But of course, Russia is a Pacific power. The biggest problem I believe that we have at the moment is that we don't look at America, and we don't look at the American military half enough. In conversations with Malcolm Turnbull when he was PM, we agreed on two things. The first one was that the greatest threat to this country is not invasion, but it's what the Russians called Finlandisation. That is control of a nation without invading it by controlling every part of what goes on around it. And the second thing that we agreed with was that the American military is the centre pole of our defence. And that's very important because we do not put, in my view, sufficient money into our own defence. Therefore, it would be a very good idea for the Americans to assist us. And they've been doing this for 75 years. They've been doing this, and it's, from us as a smaller ally, this has worked very, very well. What time did it start, Malcolm? I'm just 24. I got about 4 or 5 minutes to go. So we should look at the Americans as much as we look at anything else. And the biggest problem we faced with the Americans was that at the end of the Cold War, the way they survived from 1945 and the way they allowed and protected Western civilization to survive was because they had what they called a 2.5 war strategy. They were prepared to put their money and their children and their equipment into a military that could simultaneously win 2 major wars, for example, one in Europe, one in the Middle East, and a small war anywhere, South America, at the same time. Now, when you think about the sacrifice that has meant for the Americans, over those 75 years, you can imagine why nowadays they are sick to death of it. And we see that President Trump, some years ago, President Trump, before he became president, said the famous words that the world laughs at us. We protect ships in the Gulf that we don't own, carrying cargoes we don't need for allies who don't look after themselves. And that's what we face again today. But the biggest problem that we have is if the United States military is the centre pole of our defence policy, then the centre pole has got problems. But we're doing nothing in this country with a great hurry about it. Now, I've got to give the government of which I was a member full credit, because Australia is in the midst of the largest rearmament program that we have seen in this country in peacetime, $100 billion over 10 years. I think that was something which came out of a white paper, which no longer applies because the strategic environment now has changed magnificently. The Americans could always come to the aid of most of their allies because they were so enormous and no one was challenging them. That's all changed. The Americans now, who had a 2.5 war simultaneous strategy, are now hoping they can win one war. Let's hope, ladies and gentlemen, it's our war. So I'm very keen that we look at this and we assess our own needs. The American Navy was 600 ships strong at the end of the Cold War. It's now less than 300 strong. Now they're better ships, but if you've got a better ship in the Mediterranean and you need it in 3 other places, it's not much good. The Americans want to take that up to 355 ships, and they're putting $700 billion into their defence vote, while we put $38 billion into our defence vote, which I think will define our approach to escorting ships in the Gulf, because I think we need it much more than the Americans need it. They've got what they call 50 brigade combat teams, each of 5,000 people, a different kind, heavy, light, infantry, etc. Only 3 of them are war capable. They need, according to their own assessments, they need 1,200 of those magnificent aeroplanes that have dominated war since the end of the Second World War, which have dominated the recent battles in the Middle East. They assess they need 1,200. They've got 923. That's not too bad, but there are over 1,000 pilots short and 3,000 maintainers short. These are the facts that are not coming back to us. If we looked at the US as much as we looked at China, then we would say we must be doing some things ourselves. And let me very simply say that at the moment, we pay about 2% of our GDP on defence, and that buys us a medium-level hedging strategy. Put another way, medium-level hedging strategy says to us, we're about here, we hope that not much happens, and if it does, we've got something that we can develop from. If we had a combative Asia, as we say, or an Asia tending to conflict, we would have to put more money in. I suspect we're there already, and we're just slowly into the way of realising it. Let me finish by saying that most of us in this room would say that the Australian experience of warfare is the Anzac experience. I disagree. The Australian experience of war and conflict is one of total unpreparedness. And who pays the price of unpreparedness? In the first instance, our soldiers do. In the second instance, our neighbours do. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fantastic nation. We have a nation that we must defend and we must support. We're so bloody rich, we can afford to do it. The 12th largest GDP in the world, whilst Russia is the 13th largest GDP in the world. We can afford it, we've just decided not to do it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I first of all must thank Jim Molan because for your service, for what you've done for our country. It was really impressive. Thank you. And I hope everyone takes the time to thank a returned vet, because this is what our country should be about. Jim has got a fabulous record. He's given amazing service to our country, and he's still giving amazing service to our country. And the people of New South Wales saw it in the recent election. So the second person I want to acknowledge, or actually it's a team, is Andrew Cooper and his team, because look at this. How good is this? And I want to talk today about pro-human, because I am fiercely pro-human, because I'm tired of the lefties, the control freaks, bashing humans. Their message is simple. It's anti-human, it's based on fear and guilt, and it's nonsense. The key item I want to discuss is freedom, but it's based around a pro-human approach. I also want to connect with Nigel Farage this morning because in 2016, in my first speech, I called for an Oz exit based upon what was going to happen in Britain, the Brexit. And we must have an Oz exit because Jim Molan is the embodiment of the key leadership ingredient, without which everything else fails: strength of character. We don't have it in our corporations. We don't have it in our political parties. We don't have it in our unions. We don't have it in many of our social groups, our sporting clubs. Strength of character is fundamental. And that is what I want to discuss, because that is what determines the future of our country. The solution, first of all, the main problem we have through that lack of strength of character is a lack of leadership and a lack of guts. We can't talk about an ideology that is barbaric and that suppresses women, kills homosexuals, mutilates the female genitals, proposes a separate law in our own country. We can't talk about it. Well, it hasn't stopped me, and it's not going to stop me, and it's not going to stop Jim. The key reason is because we have massive central government that has abdicated its responsibility. Our country was set up, thanks to Americans, CPAC take credit, based upon the competitive federalism model of the US Constitution. Our Constitution embodied that wholeheartedly. What it requires is a small central government with most of the work being done by the states. That's in our Constitution. That's what makes us so wonderful as a country, what made us so wonderful. Competitive federalism. Joh Bjelke-Petersen abolished death duties in what, 70s or 80s? And what happened? People moved to Queensland to die. Okay, so that's being funny. But they wanted to leave their kids their wealth. So what did the other states do? Abolish death duties. What are death duties now? Non-existent. Who wanted to bring them back? Bill Shorten and the Greens. So that's what we're fighting against. What we've seen, though, is a massive centralisation of our government. The other thing about central government is that it is easy to hijack. And I'm no longer, when my name appears in print, my name is no longer preceded by a long list of vile adjectives, because it's now quite acceptable to challenge the scientific rubbish that is being proposed about climate. It is now no longer negative to discuss the pushes of that scientific fraud, the United Nations push for a global governance. You heard Nigel this morning talking about the global governance agenda being pushed by the EU and the UN. No wonder so many of you are smiling. We can talk freely. Well, it's never stopped me, but it's out in the open now. Lima Declaration in 1975 was signed by Gough Whitlam's Labor government. 1976, his archenemy Malcolm Fraser, as Liberal Prime Minister, ratified it. And it was about the deindustrialisation of Western countries. The Lima Declaration, read it. New World Economic Order, out there for everyone to see. In 1992, a man called Maurice Strong, a vile dictator who ranks up there, and I mean this and I can justify this, with the likes of Hitler, Mao, and Stalin in terms of the blood on his conscience. He's now dead. But he drove the Rio de Janeiro Declaration for 21st Century Global Governance, which is what we're living through now. He was pushing the deindustrialization of Western civilization, and he was pushing a global, unelected, global socialist governance. Fact. Number 3, that was in 1992. And by the way, Maurice Strong was on the Chicago Climate Exchange, ready to make money out of the climate racket. Where did Maurice Strong die? He died in China in exile, wanted by American authorities. That's the man who's leading our lives. In 1996, we had the Kyoto Protocol from the UN again. Lima was UN. Rio was UN. Kyoto was UN. And in 1996, John Howard's government started the stealing of property rights of farmers right across this country. That is fact. Is there anything more sacrosanct to a true liberal than secure private property rights? Anything? Life, okay. Anything apart from life? Anything? No. Free speech, yes. Private property rights are right up there. And the Howard government stole them. Who put in place the renewable energy target? Howard government did. Who put in place the first policy for an emissions trading scheme? Howard government did. Wasn't the Labor Party at all. Bob Hawke introduced this vile climate rubbish, but the Howard Liberal government pushed it. Strength of character. And in 2015, the Turnbull, Abbott, Hunt government signed the Paris Agreement, which is not an agreement. The Copenhagen mess was followed by a fear in the UN that they would not get the Paris Agreement signed. So what they did was they all flew in at the start, had their lovey-dovey meetings, and then they left. And when there was no agreement, every country agreed to do what it wanted to do. What did our country do? Killed its energy sector, correct? Dumb. Strength of character. As a result, our energy is now in a mess. We had under competitive federalism the cheapest electricity in the world. We've now got the most expensive. We export our coal to China. They make cheap electricity out of it. They ship back the goods and we send them the jobs. Can you see that? Look at our water policies. 2007 Water Act. Under which government? Howard Liberal government. This is not party political, this conference, but it must be fact-based, because the way you establish control over you reassert rights over the left is to dominate the conversation with facts. Facts. Has anyone ever put a fact against me on climate? No. Never. Why? Because they're wrong. Thank you, sir. Property rights, energy, water. Is there anything more fundamental? That is our food. In Queensland, central Queensland and southern Queensland, this year in a drought, we have farmers not planting fodder because of because of electricity prices, and they can't afford to irrigate. We've got the biggest export of energy in any country on the planet. And yet we've got the highest gas prices, the highest electricity prices. What the hell is going on? Strength of character. The UN is sliding so much stuff through here, and we're starting to wake up. So with due respect to Jim, I think Winston Churchill said something like, the greatest enemy is within. Winston Churchill prophesied the end of democracy as coming from within Britain, not outside Britain. And what's Nigel Farage proven? Who is destroying Britain's sovereignty? Who is destroying Australian sovereignty? Who is destroying British governance? Who is destroying Australian governance? Strength of character. Critical. I want to read out a list of things that I detest about the Greens.
We don't have time, mate. We don't have time.
So I'm going to rattle it off.
No time.
Because here's what happens. The UN, you get the point. The UN puts in place a policy. Never through Parliament. It's adopted by the Greens. Who follows them seeking their preferences? The Labor Party. Who follows them seeking their preferences? The Liberals. And so we have our government being run by external people under many different disguises. Greens are anti-science. They force opinions and beliefs. They're anti-environment. I can explain that. They're anti-social. They're anti-poor people. They've got the most regressive energy policies that are destroying the poor. Anti-education, anti-industry, anti-development, anti-civilization, anti-women, because they support Islam, anti-homosexual, they support Islam, anti-family, anti-young people, anti-Australian, anti-human, and anti-freedom. Can you see those things? That is fundamental. So let's build the cat. We've now got the UN saying, the UN's climate body saying, we need to go vegetarian. And an Australian report 2 days ago, Pep Canadell, Executive Director of the Global Carbon Project, and a researcher at CSIRO said the report was a clear call for a wholesale rethinking of the way we use and manage the land. See what they're doing? Controlling energy, controlling water, controlling land, controlling food supply. In the last 170 years, our species has gone from primitive existence to a wonderfully easy physical life. Can you not agree? Human creativity caused that. But what drove it was the ever decreasing real prices of electricity. Can you see that? Electricity prices decreasing or energy prices decreasing leads to high productivity. High productivity leads to high wealth. Wealth leads to security, longevity, and all the rest of it. In the last 170 years, we've done that relentlessly to the price of energy. And in the last 20 years, we've doubled it artificially. Why? Why? Strength of character is missing in politics. Strength of character is missing in business. Strength of character is missing in politics. So that is fundamental. Our productive capacity in this country is being smashed because we don't value freedom, because we allow people who don't have strength of character to lead us. Who is the ultimate responsibility for the leadership of this country? I thought I'd hear us in CPAC. It's us because we vote the bastards in and out. We get what we deserve. So what we need to do is recognise that politicians, all humans, suffer from the human condition, the ego. How do we minimise that? You minimise central government. How do we minimise that? Get back to our Constitution. We can never remove the ego. But the Americans showed us with their Constitution, our forefathers reinforced that. We have to minimise the opportunity to hijack our country. And that's why I say get back to our Constitution, and above all, come to events like this and spread the word when you go home. Because our country is the best country on this damn planet, and we are losing it. But we can get it back. It requires freedom, Oz exit, and strength of character. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much to both of you. I'm sorry we don't have time for questions. It is a shame. You could see, I mean, we've reached a point in history where somebody has to get on stage and justify arguing to be pro-human, which is extraordinary. And thank you for your passion. Almost screamed himself hoarse there, Senator Roberts. But we thank you for your strength of character and how passionately you are arguing for these values. So please thank our two fantastic speakers, Senator Malcolm Roberts, former Senator and would-be Senator Jim Molan.